Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Dreaming Tech, the joint sessions between Synagogue Tech and Dreaming Up 5781. The sessions where we talk about how to deliver live services and other events in the Jewish world out onto the internet and what it takes to make those things happen. We've got a great panel today on our sessions where we're discussing volunteers, how we communicate with volunteers, how we support volunteers, and how we bring volunteers into this world. And I'd like to introduce you to your panel. So I just need to do as I said. I'm now going to make David host. I said I would. He hasn't waved at me, so I forgot. But here we go. So first up into that, I'd like to introduce Rabbi David Paskin, who is on mute. We always have to have somebody on mute, otherwise the thing won't work. David.
Hi, everybody. Hi, sorry. I'm David. I'm your Torah tech guy and a regular here on Dreaming Up Tech. Happy to be here.
Next up onto the panel and a regular, we have Marty.
Hi there, Marty Atias in Silver Spring, Maryland. I'm the host of the Hybrid Ministries Tech Forum, which Leo is also on our panel as well. Happy to be here.
Switching over to this side and new members of the panel today, which we've not had on the panel, but with a wealth of experience. First of all, we have Josie.
Hi, I'm Josie, and I've been host of our Zoom since last March when I set up Zoom for the synagogue. And I have a number of co-hosts and some brilliant people around. And I'm just pleased to be here.
And then also joining from the same synagogue is Michael.
Thanks, Leo. Yeah, hi, it's first time here for me. So
Can't hear you, Michael.
Bit quiet.
Should be able to. Can you not hear me?
Gone a little bit quiet, Michael.
Try that. Sorry, I don't know why, but I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah.
Sorry, I'll have an adjust in a moment. Sorry about that. Yeah, so delighted to be here. And yeah, at FPS in North London, I lead on the tech, and so I help make it work, I guess. And I'm delighted to help out where I can.
Thank you. And then we also, over this side, and a new member as well to the panel, but a long-time follower of this show is Richard Wolfe.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Richard Wolfe. I'm from Shoat Tzedek North London Reform Synagogue up in Whetstone, where we've been online since last March, and along with my colleague Stephen Raven, who lurks around here in these parts as well. We've been making it as we've been going on for the past year.
Going back across the pond again, we've got Carmi, who's joined us first time on the panel, but a wealth of experience. Carmi.
Hi, I'm Carmi. I work with a couple of different shows here, both here in Los Angeles and in the Chicago area, and on occasion in Orlando as well. My background is tech for film and video production, more for features, but I've always helped out in tech for the show.
And then the last member of the panel, although I think some others may be joining us because they're on the way back from various events and funerals that they had to administer, is John, who brings in the education side for us. John.
A retired professor of telecommunications, failing retirement. But I actually think part of my goal here is balancing the coast. You got Marty on the East Coast, takes Carmi and I on the West Coast to balance it out.
It's great to be able to welcome you all and welcome you to this session. So the session today, I'm really hoping you, the people who are watching, can add in your questions, and this is going to be key to us, is we're talking about volunteers. How do we get these volunteers involved, and what do we need to get them involved? So we've got a number of questions that are in there. You enter the questions in Slido. You should see the link for Slido is up on the screen in front of you, so you can enter there. And I'm just bringing that. Hopefully you can bring that in, David, so we can bring that up. So the first question that we've got in here, and we're going to take the questions in the orders we've got, and we're going to talk around and around room discussion on some of these points. First question that we have here is we have a question in here saying from Josie, volunteers often need our credentials. Do you feel this is an issue if you have a pool of say 20 volunteers on a rota? So I'm going to take this question. If anybody wants to come in on the question, just raise your hand so I can know you want to bring in your points on this, so I know. This is an issue. In fact, this issue of the security has been a real problem. There was a very high-profile Instagram account in the UK that got attacked. Attacked is a difficult word. I'm 98% sure, because it literally always turns out to be the same thing, that the password level on that account was probably quite low. So how do you deal with it and how do you push it through? There are a number of things out there, including 1Password and LastPass. Both of these are tools that allow you to share passwords in a secure environment. But I would also recommend that you regularly change them. Carmi?
Yeah, we always take the opposite approach. It's a little bit more effort, but using something, one of the social managers, so that you can not give out the same password shared by everybody. So you use one of the services that lets you have each person with an individual password, and then the account has a password separate. I'm trying to remember the ones we've used most recently, but for social stuff, for anything else, we again set up individual accounts for the volunteers that you're going to have do things, and let them maintain their own passwords, rather than trying, because if you have a shared password, it's guaranteed going to be a problem.
Yeah. So Josie, what's the sort of things where you find that you're having to share the passwords? What platforms are you sharing them on?
Both Zoom and for Restream. We have 5 Zoom accounts in our synagogue, right? And the one that I use is the one that is used by the tech guys in the shul for sound and vision, which is fine. But then, they're going to get volunteers come in who are going to need my Zoom password. And then, or conversely, when I've got a volunteer that's going to be the host, I have to give them my Restream password. And so they've got to download Restream, and, you have to teach them all that. But that's another issue. It's just the sharing of the password of a Zoom account that belongs to the synagogue.
So the big thing here is we're talking about is Zoom. I wonder if anybody else. I know you can have multiples of users on it. Marty?
It depends on what kind of Zoom account you have. If you have a regular pro account just for meetings, you can actually set up other Zoom accounts, like free accounts, and then but use the same. If you register it under, say, Gmail account, you can set up multiple Gmail accounts, and for 20 volunteers, you can set up 20 accounts and register those as alternate hosts or co-hosts in your Zoom. And then each one of those accounts can have their own password. If you're using something like Zoom Rooms or Webinar, then you can set up official alternate hosts accounts. And when you use all the same domain name in the registration email, which is XX@Gmail, so Gmail is a domain. If they're all in the same domain, or better yet, if your synagogue has your own email server, and so you have your own email accounts, use those email accounts as the domains for setting up all those additional Zoom accounts. And then there's settings in Zoom where you can have bring all of those different email addresses under one account.
Can I go over to David? You've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that what we often do by me is the whoever's in the synagogue will start the meeting and then pass host off to whoever is doing the tech, right? Sort of like what we did here. So Leo he owns this account. He started the meeting and then he passed host over to me so that I can do all the switching that needs to be done.
And yeah, and I've seen it on some. I'm not saying this is a great way, but there's always the computer in the room is got a login that is logged itself in. And as one of the points that Marty said is, if you set that login to be the Gmail login or the Google account, it's logging in there. The nice thing about that in the security wise is if somebody goes and uses that account on another computer, Google turn around and say, we don't recognize this login. And they ask you to validate that you have a login. So it has a degree of security. I'm not saying it's a massive degree, but it means that somebody can't just take the Gmail account and try and use it on another PC because the IP address will bounce. Okay, moving on to the next thing. The next question that we've got up here is actually, before we go to the next question, I'm going to jump to a live poll. Which is really to get an understanding from everybody of how many are involved in your services in the tech team. And we've included the paid staff, the clergy, volunteers and musicians. So really everybody that is in the new environment in your synagogue now, how many do you have involved in your team that we're talking about? And I don't necessarily mean on an individual day. It's like, how big is this combined group that you're really having to work with on there? So if I made the question a bit of, you can re-vote or re-change your votes. So it's quite a number. This is quite interesting. The number is we're hovering around, but there seems to be a lot with the 6 to 7 and then a number with the 3. So there's a big jump between the sizes. Great. Okay, let's move on to let's take the question down and come back to it later. So we've got a couple of questions that will relate to that. So my first question, actually it was me. I can see that was me. How do you communicate with your volunteers during the services? So I'm really interested on this. The panel, how do you communicate? So the first one I could see there is Richard.
Yes, so we have a WhatsApp group which we have going during the service. Some of us use WhatsApp on the phone, others of us use WhatsApp on the desktop, which is actually really helpful because it doesn't look like you're sitting playing with your phone during the service. If it's on the desktop, it's just another screen, nobody's aware of it. It does have some disadvantages. You can't. It doesn't work really well with a service leader standing on a bimmer. We found is we actually have somebody in the room who holds up an old-fashioned board with a whiteboard to send messages across. But WhatsApp is the easiest way to go and make it work.
Next one, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Leo. Yeah, we also use a WhatsApp group and we use the chat function in Zoom. I think one of the problems that we've encountered is that we're not consistent with which one we use. And I think that often, and our rabbi is pretty amazing that she manages discreetly to be sending WhatsApp from the bimmer, which is pretty amazing, and nobody sees her doing it. And
I think we do, but nobody comments.
Okay, thanks, Leo. The other day, she yesterday said, can you open a few more windows? We suddenly realized that's something we'd forgotten to do beforehand. She noticed it after the service had started, and it took me several minutes before I picked it up on the WhatsApp because I was actually monitoring the chat at that point. So it's kind of like, got to decide which one you're going to do, but I think whichever it is, it's kind of quite effective. And I think the WhatsApp is probably the best one, but it just means you've got to have your phone open as well
Does it? So I think this is a very regular thing that WhatsApp has taken over as the comms for the communication, both pre and post, or pre and during. Does anybody use anything else on this panel? Marty?
Well, we use Discord a lot. So Discord has voice channels, which is really nice. And it also has text. And one of the nice things about it is if you have the notifications set up properly, when somebody sends you a text, either individually or on the particular channel, it can pop up a notification on your screen so that you can see what was said without having to go into the Discord.
Yeah. The only problem with that was I was getting about 3 notifications as we were going live from various people, including yourself, Marty. Thank you very much for telling me I was quite roomy. So it is difficult. I'm actually getting a follow-up question on this from Cindy, which so I'm just asking also for you, David or Cami. In the US, is there less use of WhatsApp at the moment or more?
We use a lot of WhatsApp.
It's interesting. On the West Coast, I have very few friends that use WhatsApp and very few of the organizations. Some of the Chabad guys do, but most of the others are on iOS and don't use WhatsApp. It's much less common, and at least in our circles.
That's really interesting, isn't it? How technologies are changing. As you say, the Chabad guys have been using WhatsApp for a long time. I'm aware of that. Obviously not during services, I hasten to add, but that they're using it for it's been very regular use. But you're saying they're not. David, your view of it?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I mean, especially with our younger folks, we're using WhatsApp all the time. I was fascinated as I was watching Office Hours that they're actually using a comms system that feeds right into the to panelists' ears, which I mean, I can't imagine ever being able to set that up, but I love the idea of being able to talk offline in real time with your team.
So this is a really interesting point of where we're going, and I mean it's showing where we're going. So you as you say, a year and a half ago, this would have just been, you know, the sheer thought of being able to comms talk a feedback channel would be very difficult in a service. The reality is in production, and the guys who are in production here will tell you that's a very common occurrence, and it's been there for a very long time. You know, you've got a button on your sound desk to say it. It's you know, a lot of sound kit, it's all completely built in on there, and they bring it, and it's been used to it. We're using, from my side, we're using Discord, and we use Discord as the talkback across, because people are in different locations, so we physically can do it. And when you're doing a live production and you're having to do live switching, WhatsApp's too slow. Anything where you're typing it, by the time you've typed in something, apart from please could you open Windows, it's a bit too slow. Michael?
Yeah, my thought on this is that all the time we have to remember that we're actually involved in the delivery of services, and remembering that how far do we want to go down a tech route, because otherwise we get to situations where our rabbis are wearing headsets on the bima, and I think that we would lose a huge amount if we go too much down that route. And I think we've got to be okay. Leo, you say you notice when she's typing on her phone. I've had to put pads under her computer because I was getting little knockings on the coming through the microphone system. We have to remember we're involved in delivering services here to people.
And I think you're right. I think you're right in there. Richard?
I was going to say the other thing which is actually really, really important for this process is ensuring you have really good plans in advance. So, for example, every service
we'll come on to those questions. Yeah, let's come on to that in a minute. We've got some more questions, but I'm just trying to work out about how we communicate. So I know there's questions about that. Thank you. Okay. We've got lots of questions. The questions are there. Please, the people who are watching and the attendees, please vote up the questions you want to hear. We're going to take them in order. We've got a lot of other areas to discuss, but we want to make sure that your questions that you want asked are answered. And this is your opportunity. As you can see, this panel has got a huge amount of experience in this environment and have been doing this both in the last year and in some cases a lot longer. And we really want your input and information and what you can bring into those questions. Next question that I'm going to do they're all voted at the same level here. So I'm just, this is a really good, it's a very short question. It's a really going to be an interestingly long answer. How do you recruit qualified volunteers in a small aging congregation? And that's coming from Judy Kern. David.
So I would say that one of the beauties of this digital world is that your volunteers don't need to be in your synagogue or your town. So I'm actually working right now on putting together a team, or I'm thinking about putting together a team of Zoom gabbis or Zoom masters who are able to jump into different services or programs or classes, wherever you are for your particular synagogue, and do that managing for you. So they will be trained by me in how to do that, how to facilitate a Zoom meeting, how to, and more than just switching, by the way, but also engage in comments and welcome people and sort of all of that digital rabbi piece that is also, I think, necessary. So if you have an aging small congregation, your volunteers don't need to be necessarily from your community.
You're muted, Leo.
Sorry. First time I've muted myself. Yeah. And I think that's a really interesting point. Although Judy said qualified, to me, the argument of qualified is that there is no qualifications in this. And in my view, the biggest thing that people think is they can do this wrong. The doing this wrong is not doing it. I don't actually think I've ever come across a service where I've gone, that was a complete disaster, they should never have done it. What I've come across is people going, we're not sure if we can do this. And they get through it. And every single time we've had mistakes, or in quotes, mistakes, things that didn't go to plan. A thing that didn't go to plan, the only people who don't know about it. I mean, I had a problem on Friday night. I'll give you an example. One of the cameras at the location I was at that synagogue kept freezing. And only once did it actually, those of us who knew about it saw it when it did it. Everybody else thought they lingered on a picture for a bit too long and probably didn't even notice it was wrong. And we fixed out why the problem was later. But doing it is better than not doing it. Michael.
I think that there's another point in this about what is qualified. I noticed that Judy's put somebody with computer skills in the chat. I'm reasonably tech savvy, and I've learned it over the last 9 months by doing every service for 9 months, and I've learned the processes and feel now quite qualified. And now I'm training and teaching other people to do it as well. I think people have to have some semblance of technical ability, but the most important thing is the confidence to give it a go. And I think that when I've had people come in and say, I really want to find out about what this is about, and I'm really engaged in it, they get it. They don't get it first time, but then nor did I, and it's taken me a long while to get to the point where I am now. So I think that what we need to do is and let me tell you, some of those are what some people might describe as older people. And maybe I'm described as an older person at 62, but I mean, there are people who are older who are looking at it as well and saying, yeah, I'd like to give this a go. So I think that not to be frightened of training people and giving people the experience, because the worst that can happen is that they can make a little bit of a mess of it.
I'd absolutely agree. David.
I'm going to agree that we should all give it a go, but I'm going to respectfully disagree that, well, maybe I shouldn't disagree. I'll just say that I think the training is really important. I think that knowing how to quickly navigate around Zoom, how to easily spotlight people. I think understanding, for example, that what you as the host are looking at is what is being sent out to Facebook and YouTube. So if I'm looking at the grid view, the gallery view, that's what people on Facebook and YouTube are seeing. I think knowing how to lower hands, unmute, mute, I think having those skills is actually really important for the success of managing and facilitating
and we've demonstrated yeah. Sorry, Dave. And we've demonstrated tonight that we even people who've been doing it for forever still forget to mute. I mean,
the last time I was switching this show, Leo had to remind me, hey, get out of gallery view because that's what you're sending out. No, we're never going to get it right. But I think that, and by the way, Michael, I couldn't agree more that the more you do it, the better you become at it. Absolutely. There's another piece.
David, you've just let me down. What would the panelists be if we didn't have a disagreement? You can't agree with me afterwards.
I'm sorry. I completely disagree with Michael. But I would also say that, another piece is, and I put this as a question here, but making sure that your volunteers not only know what they're doing, but have the right tools to make it happen easily and quickly. And, so whether that's a Stream Deck or whether that's a Bluetooth foot pedal, whatever the tools are that help move things along and get things done, I think the training is actually very, very important.
Josie, and then Carmi after that.
We've only recently been starting to expand our volunteer list. Until now, it was Michael and David who does the vision, Michael does the sound, I do the Zoom host, and then we have a co-host. So now that the synagogue are expanding the pool of volunteers, so obviously, as Michael says, we're having to train people up. So, and some of these people apparently are offering their services who have only ever been in Zoom as a participant, never done anything before, even as a co-host. And so for me, from my end, so I meet with them during the week and go through stuff. And I thought I'd covered every eventuality for the new co-host last Shabbat. And when I asked her to please scroll through, because I'm on speaker view, she's on gallery view. I'm on speaker view because I'm streaming. And I said, could you go through and mute? And I gave her the name of the congregant because Michael had said he keeps unmuting himself. And she sent me a message in the chat and said, how do you mute somebody? And I thought, I thought we'd covered all that, and that's what it's frustrating. I want somebody who's going to help me. And you think you've told them everything, but clearly I hadn't covered muting and unmuting. What?
That it's a really good point, Carmi.
So I have sort of two different halves of the response. So the first part is I think that for even older congregations, one thing to look at is, as has been pointed out, if you don't have to be local, then ask for children or grandchildren. If they don't have to be there and they don't have to show up in a location, you may find people who can help out who aren't local, who are connected, right? That's an easy one. But on the other half, I completely agree that you're gonna have to train people for a lot of this. And the idea of saying, it's great, come in, don't worry about it. But it does mean that you probably want to do more than just a day or two of training during the week. It's have them come in, do some small meetings and let them do some examples, just do some stuff. It's a little bit more time, but it will make everybody more confident, and it will mean that they'll have a better experience having done it, which means they're more likely to do it again. If people feel like they messed up and they didn't do a good job, then they're going to be more concerned about coming back. So giving people an environment in which they can fail and not have a problem.
I think that's absolutely, and I think we'll come back around to that in a minute, but I just want to take David and Marty's points.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, shameless plug, that I'm running actually this month for the 4 Thursdays in June, and I'll probably repeat this again in August. a Zoom Gabby Tech training where I'm covering settings. What are the settings you should set up beforehand? Security, muting, spotlighting, screen sharing, annotation, chat moderation, all those different things. Because people need to. We need to, and again, because this can all happen in digital space, each congregation doesn't need to be responsible for providing this training for their own community. We can work together, like we're doing here, to support all the different communities in their needs. So I invite you to try that out if you're interested.
Marty.
Yeah, that's a really great service, David. Thank you for doing that. It's really important to have good training and consistent training and ongoing training, because there's a lot to learn, there's a lot to know, and nobody can absorb it, in one training session. The other thing that's really important is rehearsals. Just do some offline, or they have to be online, but they don't have to be announced. Do some rehearsals where the pressure is really low, and it's if somebody makes a mistake, it's inconsequential. And
I want to come on to that. That's a really good point that I wanted to come on to. I've got a sort of a question that I put in myself, but talking about rehearsals, my question, but we can change it around, was: do your volunteers meet with your clergy before each service? Taking that into the rehearsal side as well, Marty. How do you see that coming? What do you recommend people should be doing?
Well, I was going to say, it's interesting that you bring in clergy, because I was also going to say that motivation, volunteer motivation, has a lot to do with how well they will commit. And people will respond to different forms of motivation. But one thing that a lot of people do respond to is when they're asked, when they're invited, when they're requested by clergy to participate and to help out in a way that only the clergy can communicate, is important to the synagogue and important to the congregation. In terms of rehearsals, yes, I think it's important for clergy to be there, again, for that motivation part that shows that they're committed to this service of streaming. But even if somebody stands in for the clergy, it would be helpful. Rehearsal should be as realistic as possible with everybody that is going to be there. That includes any sort of video playback or slides that would be included in the service. Make it as realistic as possible.
So let me just ask from the volunteer side of this, rather than from David's side or the rabbi's side. So Richard and Josie, do you have a regular meetings in advance of each of your services?
No.
So that people know what they're going to be doing, or is it sort of find out on the day? How often?
No.
Start with Richard first. Okay, start with Josie. Josie first.
When I find out who are my volunteers for the week, during the week preceding the service, I will meet with those co-hosts in a Zoom service of my own, that I set up as a Zoom call that I set up. And I make them the co-host of that person and myself, so that they get to see how the screen is different for them than if they were a participant. And
do you go through with them the service that's coming up? Do you tell them which service we're doing? What's going to be who's doing all the various different parts? Do you get a chance?
We get one is going to be for Shabbat morning, and one is going to be for Kabbalat Shabbat. So obviously they know the service. Well, at least I assume they do. And they know kind of how to watch the door. And
okay. And Richard?
So what we do is we have a meeting every Monday late afternoon, which we all look forward to with great joy, where we review the events of the previous weekend, and we try and share some honest feedback with each other about what we feel worked well, what didn't work, and any tweaks to it. Because every service, there's always something you can find, and you see who's spotted everyone's little messes. That's fine. We've got a great thing that we constantly say it doesn't matter if it goes wrong, and we do that on a week-to-week basis. And we also have rolling spreadsheets of who's the service leaders going 6-8 weeks ahead, and we then have service sheets which are prepared weekly, rolling ahead, and for every service there is often, especially if it's a mitzvah or something like that, we'll typically have a 120-line spreadsheet telling us every single who's on screen, what the graphic is, whether there's a bit of music keying in, who, what, where, when, and how, and hopefully on the day the officiating member of clergy will follow the sheet. But if they don't, it makes it even more fun.
Michael.
Just very quickly, I think that one of the things that came up in the week just gone is that a new volunteer who was being trained on the tech, not on Zoom, we suddenly realized it was more important that they knew the service than they knew the tech. Because actually, if you've got somebody who's looking, who's saying, I'd like to volunteer, but they're not somebody who's been a regular attender and they don't really know the service, it's a double whammy in terms of training. You can train them on the tech, but you can't train people on knowing the service.
It's great. It's great when people ask the question that leads on to the next question. And I'm going to bring that question straight in, which is David Paskin's question, wondering about how much Torah volunteers need to be to be effective. David, do you want to take that question yourself to start with it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not sure I have the answer, but I would, one of the mottos that I kind of use is that you have to know your Torah and you have to know your tech. That, and when I say Torah, I'm thinking in the most expansive, meaning of the term. It's not enough. I don't think it's enough to have someone who can just press buttons. We were talking before we went live about Live Control, this really, I think, intriguing service where someone that you hire, basically a video production person remotely to switch your service. That one of the many challenges there, one of the challenges is they have no idea what you're doing. And they, if you don't have that knowledge, if you don't understand the flow of the service, if you don't understand the back and forth between a rabbi and a cantor, it can be.
I would say, I would absolutely. So one of the things that we are seeing coming up more and more is the use of liturgy on the screen. And I've sat there, I can switch a service. The minute following the liturgy, I can follow the liturgy. I know what's coming up next. I can do this. But switching the liturgy, no, I just can't do it. I just can't do it. Richard.
I was going to say, one of the things where you need the person with the experience of the service is when your rabbi or service leader decides to go a little bit off-piste, which occasionally happens, and given the nature of what we're about, that's perfectly fine. But if you haven't got somebody around who actually knows broadly where this is going or what is going, that is very capable of throwing you. It throws us sometimes that you just have to sit there and try and work out where it's going, and when things also sometimes might get omitted from a sheet. You might have a run through sheet and something gets omitted, and working out whether or not you need to go and call it back in and say, did you mean to put this in, or do you let the thing run? And it's just, you need people who've got the experience.
I agree. Carmi and then Michael.
So it's important not just to know the service from the religious standpoint, right? I can go to any shul anywhere and from Orthodox to Reform, and pretty quickly figure out what's going on because I have enough of a background. But there's a big difference between what would happen in a Chabad shul, even during the week where they would be Zoom, having a Zoom service, how the service runs there versus someplace else. And each individual shul has a lot of differences, right? So it may be that in some congregations, the rabbi is really the focus, and in some congregations it's not, or various things. So having a flavor and understanding of the local specifics is also pretty important.
I think that's right. Michael, and I'll just come back on this after you, Michael.
Okay, just the final thought on that is that some volunteers who seem to be very involved in the service know it really well. They come along with their kippah and their talit, and they sit down alongside me and they open the siddur, and I say, hold on a second, you're here doing tech, you're not here for the service. And they say, well, can't we do both? And the answer is actually, no, you can't do both. You've got to choose. If you're going to do tech, you have to concentrate on it completely from beginning to end of the service.
I think that's actually a fascinating point to say, because I've sat there and I've been in a service and they've come up and they've given me the prayer book and this, that, and the other. I'm like, I don't even think I'm going to even open this, because it's not that I just can't. I've just got so many things happening that I have to concentrate on there. And coming back exactly what Carmi is saying is there is that question of how somebody can remote switch it that aren't familiar with the service. And it isn't like it's like, well, it's exactly the same every time. And David, you were saying about this switching company. I just wonder how they're going to cope with the complete different nuances. And there are some real nuances. A good example is that when you go to silent parts of the service, do you sit there and you're used to doing a zoom into the near to mid? Do you do it? Are you not used to doing that? Are you a group? Are you a synagogue that only has a 25-second quiet period, or you're a synagogue that has always gone for more about a 2-minute? Marty.
So this is really interesting. And I want to pick up on something that Richard said a little while back. When doing any kind of production work, doesn't matter whether it's, full-on broadcast network production of a sporting event, or if it's a congregational service, preparation is really key. And Richard talked about documentation. He talked about something that's used very often, or almost on every single broadcast production, is called a run of show, which is a spreadsheet that lists that is broken down in 15-minute time segments, and everything that happens during the event is listed on that document. And like the open of the event with the beginning slide happens at this time. That slide will be on screen for so many seconds or minutes, and then the next thing happens, and then the thing after that happens, and each one will last a certain period of time. And it doesn't have to be exact, but the order is there. And when you're doing production work, whether you're mixing sound and you've got to turn certain microphones on and off at certain times, or if you're switching cameras and you know that something is going to happen at this part, I've got to have my cameras focused on the pulpit, on the bema at this particular place, and then somebody is going to, maybe the cantor is going to sing a song and they're going to be over there. I need to have my camera ready to go there. There are things that happen. You have to be thinking, or should be thinking, 2 or 3 steps ahead of where you are, and that takes concentration.
So I'm going to just I'm just going to show that in an example. So what we do is we always, sorry, it's just going to jump over in front of me. We create a pack for an event, and we always use Google Sheets for it, because we can actually get everything in here. So this is a run of this was for IMPGA's briefing about a situation in Israel a couple of weeks ago, and you can see we literally sit there and work on who and every single time, and the run time of everything doing it. I chose not to do a service rather to show you a service, and as Marty says, every single thing we do there, and we update the times that this actually was in Zoom, and you can see we ended up with 11 speakers or something in a really short space of time. We contain, not only do we put that in there, we also contain all the streaming information, how we're going to be doing it. We contain a whole load of other stuff. We put in the stuff that we did for the Zoom forms, so we can make in there. We put every single thing. I'm obviously not going to show you the contact information, unless you want the phone numbers of a couple of MKs, which probably is going to cause me a lot of trouble. So we do all of that, and we make sure we always now use Google Sheets. The reason we use Google Sheets, one sheet, it's the source of truth. It's the same place. We take anything where people are sending Word documents or taking out, and we put it into Google Sheets, because otherwise you end up literally, I've been in events where we go, hold on, that is the last, we're on the wrong one. And then you're panicking. And the other advantage of a Google Sheet is you can have one sheet, which is the run of show, and you can have another sheet, which has got the other stuff and the other stuff. So it can be literally goes on and on and on, but it's still one document. So
Yeah,
that's
because during the
key.
week, things change often,
Absolutely.
Somebody will change something and it goes on the document. And if you don't have the current one, you can be out of touch.
Oh, we've all been there. Carmi, you've got so much experience in this area.
So we in film production, we have something specific. We have colored documents. So because the thing is, it's great if everybody is only looking at an electronic version of the document. That the common document is awesome. But if you have to have things where you have to print it out because people aren't going to be in a position, we always do different colors. So there's a color order for script colors, so you can look. And the biggest advantage, if you can do colored paper, it's awesome. If you can't, it's not a crisis. But the biggest advantage of that is if you have the gold copy and you see somebody else or two other people and they're with a blue copy, just at a glance. You don't have to look and know that you have version 9.2, that you don't have to see anything. You just can see from physically that their paper is a different color, that one of the two groups of people is wrong. And it makes it much easier to do that. I was just going to say one other thing about the idea of remotely switching. I think that there are some services for some denominations where the service is much more organized, and for most of the services that I've been to, the Jewish services I've been to, and some Christian services, they're more freeform. So you have even with a run of show, you're going to still have more.
I know exactly what you mean. I mean, a good example of that is if you go to a Catholic mass, it's very, very regimented and there's very little switching. When I've ever watched any Catholic mass broadcasts, it's very still. It's a very static. There's very little movement in the changing. John, coming back on, I was going to ask you on this, John, from the education side, because you're seeing, you've seen a huge shift. Is this way of handling documentation, the use of the single documents, etc.? Are you seeing this coming through in some of the stuff you're doing at all?
Well, a lot of faculty members have been using Google Docs as a way of communicating and making it easier to do edit and get feedback. But the most recent work I'm doing is with the California State Parks, doing electronic field trips. And we're getting ready to do an event for World Ocean Day. And without Google Docs, we wouldn't be able to pull it off, because and Marty, I think, talked about it, making sure you are all on literally the same page, the same digital page. We have two sets of divers teams from different organizations, State Park divers, Monterey Bay Aquarium divers. We have interpreters for World Ocean Day at various state parks along the coast. There's 18 of them. And then we have the tech crew pulling this all together. And so we actually use Google Docs for run of show comments. We use the Google spreadsheets for timing. And we not only use it for communicating before the show, but as we're going through the show, we have somebody whose sole job is keeping track of where we are in the show. So in the spreadsheet, as we're going through the run of the show, it changes from clear to red when we're done, and then when we're coming up with something,
we color it. All I can think about when you say Monterey Bay, your thing is your sea otters. I could sit there and watch your sea otters forever. And they're so nice over there. So that's it. Thank you. Right, moving on to the next question. We've got quite a lot of questions, and if anybody out there watching wants to add questions or vote up the questions, so we can go through these questions and answer your questions in respect to volunteers and how we should deal with that. Mark Hadley has asked, what things would you do to put a style guide for volunteers? Alternatively, is there a style guide for your temple? What would you call attention to? So I'll open this up and say, I think this is really key. Going and seeing how different temples, how different synagogues deliver their services, even in the same denominations, they all have a style. And I think it's important to know what your style is. A good example I find with this is the switching speed. So I see with some people they switch really fast. A good example, FPS, they switch the cameras really fast, lots and lots and lots of switching. Another synagogue, which is literally a mile and a half away from them, Aleph, are very much a stationary camera that they switch only at important moments during the services. And I do think that you need to impart that to whoever your volunteers of what your style is. Michael.
Yeah, seeing as you brought us up, I guess I should make a comment on that and how it came about. When the system was first installed, we were not doing lots of switching, between rabbi and, as you call him, cantor, musician, and various other shots we had into the ark and so on and so on. So when the ark is open, we go to the ark or the netamid. But the more dynamic we made it, the more positive feedback we got from the congregation. So much so that, Leo, as you know, that in the past couple of weeks, we've put in a GoPro into the system, which either sits on the piano keyboard and we bring in the pianist more, or sits by other musicians, give different angles, and it gives a far more dynamic structure to what the service looks like. And I think that, as with quite a lot of things, we try to keep shots dynamic and moving, but not apart from when the rabbi is reading or the musician is singing. We do actually switch about, and we feel that the response has been really positive from the congregation.
So it's really interesting that you have that response, and I'd be I'm fascinated for others to come in here and just say what they think about the way that they deliver their services. They're different. I say the complete extreme is probably, or sort of is a synagogue which is virtually, I think, your closest, which is Finchley Reform, who will stay in the gallery view the whole time and never swap, because of the community aspect of that. And they love that gallery view. Josie.
Do they stream, Leo?
Yep.
Because
they
I
stream
think
their gallery view out to social media the whole time.
That's interesting.
Josie?
Well, we would have a number of congregants who would not participate in any way. We couldn't ask them for any mitzvot, because if they knew that they were being seen, in that way on social media, they wouldn't do it, or they just wouldn't even Zoom at all if they knew that they were being seen everywhere. And we're now beginning to do a little bit of hybrid, where a few people are coming into shul, and we're having to ask them, as I do with people who have been invited for mitzvah, do you mind being seen in a tiny little box on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter? We haven't had anyone say no yet, but we have a number of congregants who won't even do Zoom unless we're not streaming.
Brett has joined us, and I know he, do you set a style for what the services you lead?
So the style kind of became what it is, I think, through trial and error. But I think it's also a big assumption that we decided on a style, or that for the most part, at least most synagogues chose like a particular style that they wanted to use. Most people were trying to see what could work and what was possible, especially when using volunteers to do things. And that started to change a little bit with like presets and things like that. But we have a menu, right? We have a breakdown of everything going on in the service, literally by prayer, with info next to it that says who's going to be the focal point, if there is a focal point, when the congregation is going to be speaking, when every detail is basically laid out. And so the people running the cameras are able to then switch around and try and adapt to some extent. We try and go for flowy, I think, more than very jagged switching, which is not always easy, but I think it becomes like a process, if that makes sense.
It does. So we've heard how Josie delivers the FPS, Finchley Progressive Synagogue. Sorry for those who I'm using letters, and sometimes people are going, "What does that mean?" Finchley Progressive Synagogue do one thing. We've talked about Finchley Reform, which does another thing, and Brett's talked about. So I can't remember which synagogue you are, Brett.
It's Temple Beth Am in Jupiter, Florida.
Okay, so I'm going to ask David Paskin, who almost a native digital rabbi, as close as we've got to a native digital rabbi. How on do you set a style for yours, and what is that style?
Well, I have it easy because I'm not a congregational rabbi anymore. I was for 20 years. And so when I lead services now, I'm just dealing with a digital community. And I do the whole thing. I do the switching, I do the Zoom, I do the service. And I have spent a tremendous amount of time and energy setting things up in the way that I want them to be. So and I have complete control. So I have it easy compared to other people who are dealing with teams, who are dealing with volunteers, and who are dealing with both roomers and Zoomers in both scenarios.
Okay, we're going to move on to a couple of other questions. The next question we have in here is from David Rosen. How many volunteers do you have per service, and how many in your volunteer pool? So we had the poll up for that. I'm just going to bring that back up again, which is that one. So I'm going to activate that. So we're looking at some numbers here that we jumped around, and it's jumped completely the other way around, as these things do. And the winner at the moment is that 3 is the majority of the people are saying that they get that. So if we think about that, that's going to be a clergy of some, a rabbi or a cantor running the service, somebody doing the switching, and somebody maybe doing the Zooms. I would say that's probably the minimum. I mean, you're right, David. You could do it all yourself, definitely. But and I'm not. I think where we're going. So, what are the roles that people are seeing as they're going to be the minimum that they think they need to deliver services? I'm going to start with Richard. How many people are actually delivering the service, including or excluding the rabbis?
So, one of the things we're going through is we're moving from the purely online service now to doing the hybrid service model, which we'll be putting backwards and forwards. And one of the first things we came into that before that, there was Stephen and I who we do the tech, and there was whoever the officiating rabbi was around, and there might be a director of music popping up, and we like a lot of community participation, so normally lots and lots of different members of the community coming in and out as and when we needed them. What we found is when we moved back into the synagogue, is we rapidly realised is that you actually need, for want of a better word, a stage manager to actually make sure people end up standing in the right place at the right time. And the question is it what we might have euphemistically referred to as a warden, but actually it's something a bit more than that, because it's that thing about getting people in the right place. And then you get into this really, really interesting question about who are the people in the room when you're doing the hybrid service there. Who are they for? Are they effectively something akin to the studio audience, or are they actually there as active service participants, and how do you avoid one from the other? And it's a really, really interesting question and debate we're having, which I'm not sure we got to the bottom of.
I'm just going to go around the room. Is there anybody else wants to comment on this? Be really interested. Michael?
Yeah, there are 2 things here. First of all, there'll be either 4 or 5 of us actually in the sanctuary, the rabbi, musician, 2 musicians on Saturday, 1 on Friday. Then there's 2 of us on tech, and Josie plus 1 on Zoom from home. So there's minimum of 7, and usually there's more than 1 co-host. So I would say 8-ish, something like that, involved in most services. I think that point that you've just put there, Richard, which is about how do you make it all inclusive for both parties, is really difficult. And I think that one of the things that astounded us by the brilliance of our rabbi when we were exclusively virtual is that she would deliver her service to the camera, which means that people who had her on speaker view felt that she was actually engaging with them, talking to them at home. We've now been commenting about how hard she's finding it, engaging with the people in the sanctuary, of which we've been having 14, 16 over the past 2-3 weeks since we've opened up. And it's actually, that's part of their learning. And I think that to have both those two cohorts of people feeling engaged and involved actually comes down to the ability of the officiant to talk to the camera and talk to the room at the same time.
I think that's so what happened, I did a service which I showed the examples of last week for Sue, who is in the attendees Swezzers, and we suddenly realized the day before or the night before, I'm like, how does the rabbi see who's there? And I thought, I didn't get a chance to speak to Sue before the service, or before we actually got there. I said, have you got anything, and what did she see? So we decided what we ended up doing is we put this Facebook portal on her pulpit, so she had a direct view of where she can see it. Now, in other synagogues, what we've also done is we put a screen right by the cameras, so that if they look up at the cameras, they're looking up and seeing the gallery view. And I think it's going to be super tough when they get back in the room fully, because as we know anyway, you don't actually, when you've got a room, you don't actually sit there and look at each individual person for the whole service. You jump between them. Brett, how do you find that yourself from your perspective of that engagement?
So we're not using Zoom. We got away from Zoom very, very early on because we were already streaming way before the pandemic by years. It was a much easier and logical jump to do it that way, especially because so many of the boxes on Zoom became empty. People either were participating but didn't want to show their faces, or didn't want people to see that they were sitting in front of their TV or like in their lazy boy or what have you, and they just didn't want to show their faces. We have two-way communication. We have a chat going on multiple platforms that feeds in, and we're able to see that. But logistically, if I have, let's say, 100, even just 100 people, right, who are watching or participating in some way, there's no easy and good way that I can put them all up on a screen, right? You're talking about someone having to have a device and flip through the different configurations on Zoom and things like that. And it's not feasible to both lead the service and also check in and see who just joined us, to see, who's raising their hand. So it's,
yeah. So this is what we're doing. So we're using for a number, they've gone in Josie talked about it earlier, that she's using Restream to send out. And I think, Michael, am I right that on the Restream, you sit there on the Restream chat and seeing the chat messages coming from, because it collates all the messages from Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, everything into one place. Are you the person who brings those in?
That's correct. Once I've done the sound checks at the beginning of the service, assuming the service is just going to run normally, I don't have much to do. I just have to cut in when we have people coming into the service on Zoom, if they're doing an aliyah or something like that, in which case there's quite a lot of sound controls to do then. But so yeah, I handled the Restream chat, and actually making people who join us from pretty much all over the world feel valued and included has been an amazing experience. We've got people who have found our synagogue by accident or by design, I'm not sure, but now come to services practically every week. And I think it's been a really valuable addition to our community.
I think it's great. And I think the nice thing is, because you can use it to ask people to put into the chat if they've got a yard site coming out this week, you can put into the chat any other messages, and then the rabbis will read them out. And on reverse, as you say, you're able as to comment back and just say thank you, etc. Marty.
So there's interaction with the audience. Well, you have two different sections of your congregation. You have people who are in the sanctuary and people who are outside the sanctuary. And I think what's important to talk about is engage, how easy it is to engage the people who are outside the sanctuary and to make them feel like the officiant is actually engaging with them as well. And what goes to that is careful positioning of the cameras in terms of where they are left to right and in height. And the purpose of those screens that Leo mentioned is not just if you're using Zoom to put the gallery up there, but if the rabbi or whoever's speaking from the pulpit is reading from a paper, that information, that scripting, the sermon, whatever, can be actually up on those screens, which means that people are they're not looking down on their paper, which makes people at home feel like they're disengaged. But they're looking up. They're looking up towards where the cameras are. They're looking up where the congregation is, in both inside and outside. And it's that eye engagement, like I'm looking at you right now, makes you feel engaged. If I'm down here and I'm talking, I'm not engaging with you. I'm looking down here.
So I just want to really jump to John and ask him from his perspective of that education or a different view, and who's been doing it for a long time, that engagement. What do you think about the engagement, and how do you bring it with the people who are remote?
I think this is the big challenge we're all going to have as we go from being remote to having these hybrids where people are in the room and people outside the room, and you get engaged in very different ways. And how do you not disenfranchise the people who are physically in your space, the roomies, from the Zoomies who are remote? And I think when Brett was talking about, engaging with people remotely and checking them in and doing all that, there are very sophisticated systems that are being used to handle breakout rooms and people in subsets and chats and communicating with them. In your face-to-face meetings, you're usually not chatting out loud. For our students, they might be passing a note or winking at people. So I think there's different ways to engage with people in the room and with people remotely, and you have to figure out which of those strategies can help both groups. And when you are particularly engaged with the roomies, are you disengaging from the people who are watching in Zoom? And when you're sort of talking to the audience, wherever that may be, or out, what we found with our students to make sure that we've engaged the people remotely in the hybrid classes is that we let the people know that they're in the room, that they are in fact the physical representations of the people who are remote, and they're part of that experience. And we do that in a lot of activities within a service, but reading along and the like, and then panning the pictures. But I think when you talk about your style guide, what is the flavor and the feeling that you want to have? And we had with our faculty, we were looking at the different styles that teachers have and how those different styles got transferred to how they ran their classes. And I'd say the feedback that we got is that the students really like there's certain motifs in film, if you go to a clock on the wall, time has passed. So there's certain languages that have been developed within remote Zoom classes. And the more that people sort of stick with that, not a lot of switching of cameras, the sort of when you have a camera working on a song, you try to do it at phrases or appropriate times. And I think that's the biggest challenge that we've found with volunteers, even with our parks, is that the tech is hard enough so that people are concentrating on which button I should do, not thinking of what is the appropriate moment within the action that's taking place to make that switch.
Absolutely. I'm going to Michael, come back on this, and then I just wanted to quickly follow it through with Brett, who started on this point.
I'll start off by saying not our synagogue, but I was talking to somebody else who was dealing with hybrid services and wanting to equalize the feeling between the I like the zoomies and the roomies. I like this. And what they had is they had a phone with a Zoom account facing the roomies so that it was streamed to Zoom so that the people on Zoom could see who was in the room too. So it was an all-round experience, which seemed a bit strange to me. And I think that it defeated the object of having people back into the sanctuary, because there are some people that don't want to be on Zoom, but we haven't actually done that. But I have heard that another congregation is doing that just to equalize that experience.
Brett, did you want to just finish up on this, on what you do?
Yeah. So we're displaying things all over the place, which makes it especially complicated for us. And it's been very hard, more than I think anything else, is to what John was saying. The people in the room need to feel as though they are important. The people at home also need to feel like they're important and not as though they're second-class citizens, as it were. And so it's the language that we use is tricky, right? Saying that you're not part of the audience, right? Which was something that I was saying for a long time. And I had to adapt to participation as a vocab word. Now, we also have stage displays up on the walls, kind of facing the bima. But in that sense, we also made somewhat of a mistake, which is that the churches learned the exact place that you needed to place displays so that it looked as though you were looking at the camera still, and that your eyes weren't up and that your eyes weren't down. So these screens are up here. So my eyes are like this, which prevents me from being straight on with the camera. So that people don't necessarily think that we're looking directly at them. And it's also, the more complicated that you get, the more people you need, or you need to be focused on a lot of different things at once, which also affects your ability to be engaged with the people both in the room and at home, right? Everything is give and take.
So just a really interesting quick thing on this panel here. How many of you are using teleprompters? Who is here on a teleprompter? So John is, David is. Brett, you look very close to like you nearly are, because you're always looking at the thing.
So virtually everything, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not. I know, and it's something that my camera angle, I am looking down at the panel, and the camera is just slightly off, and it is learning how to do that and learning. And I'm not a presenter, but I do know that that's the big thing that people have to learn. John, did you want to say something on that?
Go. I was just say, I mean, eye contact is so critical, and that's really the challenge for people remote, because if I look up there to see my clock, I'm not looking straight at you. And with the teleprompter, it's much easier because you could get the lens directly behind what you're looking at, but you can't always do that. For our events that we do with the parks and others, and we have people who are not used to, and you can train people to know that they need to look there and sort of use their peripheral vision to see the panel. But we get day glow tape and wrap it around the lens and just say, just look at the dot.
Look at that.
Just look at that.
David.
Yeah, I have I'm doing a video, actually, it'll be out on Tuesday, about the essential E's, what I call the essential E's, which are eye contact, engagement, and energy, which, forget all the toys and the tech and all that stuff, but those, if you can do those three things when you're streaming, then you're off to a great start. And so that'll be a quick thing on Tuesday, and I'm actually expanding that for a class that I'm offering to the Chicagoland Jewish community about, I don't know if any of you have seen Center Cam, which is this Indiegogo thing, which is really cute. There are some creative ways, if you don't want to go the whole teleprompter route, to do that I'm not using one now. I'm just because I'm
Marty.
Tally lights.
John,
important.
is that the camera? Hold on,
John
before you
has
go.
a center cam. You're kidding me.
John has got a center cam.
I have a little bit of every gadget.
How'd you get that already? Wow.
Well, you got to know people, but it works. It works pretty well. And some of the smaller cameras, we'll get sort of techie here, but VDO 360 has a camera that's about the size of a quarter. I use 2 monitors when I can't use a teleprompter, so I have the monitor below and the monitor above and the one in the middle, because that's sort of the natural way of doing it. But we've learned presidential candidates use these presidential prompters. They call them that. They're just a sheet of glass, or actually reflective glass. And it turns out they're not that expensive to make. And they really make such a difference. I would think anyone who's trying to do services, depending on what your platforms are, having that device, because it doesn't break the view for the audience. And it really makes it much easier to keep the eyes of the presenter. And to me, that was the biggest challenge we had with our faculty, because it's hard to really make contact with a student if you're just slightly looking off.
Marty, you were going to come in on this point.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And then Kami.
And so I was going to say, tally lights. If you have more than one camera in your sanctuary, you want to know which camera to look at, which camera is online at the moment, which camera your congregation online is seeing. That can make a big difference, because if you're looking at one camera but the camera that's on the air is over there, you're not looking at the right place, or you may not be looking at the right place. It's not to say that you have to look at the camera all the time either, but it helps to know which camera your online viewers are seeing.
Kami.
It's also a follow-on to that is it's also really useful to know that you're not on camera right now. So if the rabbi is not on camera and the camera's on the cantor or on a congregant in the audience or someone on Zoom or something else, it's really nice to know that you can be looking around at the people in the congregation, because it's quite funny, but when everyone's in the room, the officiants don't make eye contact with everybody. They sort of look around, or maybe don't even make eye contact with most people, because they're sort of more involved, and you don't have to feel the same way when you're in the room, because you're there and you feel the participation sort of more direct. But what's interesting is with Zoom or any streamed thing, the eye contact with the congregation on the stream, they, as someone said earlier, they feel like you're talking to them, even though you're actually talking to 100 people, and you're focused on them, even though you're focused on no one. And so that's the advantage of tally lights is really important, especially so it means that the person on the bima can look around and not make it look like they're not paying attention.
Michael.
I think that's all. Yes, there's a job for the officiant to be doing what they do, but actually that's the job of the tech team, as far as I'm concerned, making sure that the right camera with the right shot is on the right person at the right time. And I think that we have got it sussed now, and that we all know and understand that, if the rabbi wants to get herself a glass of water in the middle of or get some of her water, she knows when the camera's not going to be on her, and we know that too. And if the guitarist suddenly feels that he needs to tune his guitar, he's got a little symbol, he says, we turn off his guitar channel on the sound desk, and he can tune his guitar quietly when he's off camera. So it's about the tech team actually going back to what we were saying earlier about A, knowing the service, but B, and really much more important,
so there's
people.
So I've had this with other events as well. We actually turn around to them and say that if we're going to run videos, we actually want to run videos for a slightly longer period, so that we know you're off camera for 4 minutes, not do a 1 minute video, then you're back on, and a 1 minute video and you're back on. Because if you're going to give a break, you need to give somebody a break. Otherwise, it's quite stressful. The other thing I was going to say with this, and I think it's key, and we've covered this in the past, but I think it's always worth saying, is that the engagement with people, following on from what David has said, goes up dramatically if you can hear them well. And the audio quality of your services make a huge difference. Everybody goes camera first and they think that the audio sounds fine. We're all getting used to hearing this. If you were here earlier before we started this, we went round the room to make sure everybody's audio was close enough. And sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong. But for those watching, once we adjusted a couple of minor bumps at the beginning, we're all roughly around the same level and we're clear. And that is important for you to be able to engage with the people watching. Okay, got some other questions coming in, so we're going to put these up. Mark Hadley, the military has an acronym used for comms planning for maneuvers, PACE, primary, alternative, contingency, and emergency. Suggestions for services and events. So, where do you start with your emergencies? What's in the emergency bucket for during a service?
Call Leo.
Yeah, no, not call me. That's too late by then. John.
We started this at the beginning of the show talking about how you get people to log on and giving the credentials. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges. Particularly with Zoom, the host has an incredible amount of power. And if the host isn't there, things don't happen. So we rapidly need to realize that there's always a host, but the host is the only person who can start a meeting. But with Zoom, you can make an alternative host. So we've had any number of events where we couldn't start because for whatever reason, the host and that host computer, something happened to their internet. So even if we weren't planning to use an alternative host, we try to make sure that there's an alternative host, because an alternative host has all the functions that a co-host can do in Zoom, but it also can start the meeting.
Richard, do you have some comments on this?
Yeah, I think we have a co-host, but the biggest thing I think we've learned is in the phrase of that well-known book which many of us have, don't panic. It will go wrong, and actually just take a sharp taking breath and communicate effectively using whatever backup system you have. So we had something a fortnight ago in the middle of a mitzvah where I suddenly realised that my machine had decided it wanted to go out to lunch and needed a reboot. It's not the ideal thing you want, but you need to just communicate effectively around your team so that people know what's happening and deal with it calmly. And actually, the worst thing you can do is panic. Stuff happens. The first time we tried a hybrid service, the entire system went down just as the rabbi was about to give their sermon. Some people might say that was fortuitous, but we happen to have our second associate rabbi on there, and we'd pre-warned him that if something goes wrong, and we asked him suddenly, could he go and invent a sermon in 5 seconds flat? You just need to go and have little backup, just little escape routes all over the place.
John?
Well, I think the one thing with the office hour tech group, which is a number of us are on, is to have something like a please stand by side or technical difficulty slide with somebody who could put it up so that your audience just doesn't know what's happening, you could say. But the thing I learned from office hours is never put your logo or your company name on your having technical difficulties, because it will become a meme. So have something that says we're having technical difficulties, or we'll be right back, and then go to
it. But don't put the Schulz logo on it. That's a good point, actually, because you would naturally do it, but that's not the thing you want broadcast around the world. I think that all of these things come down to the same point. We talked about volunteers. We've talked about how they need to be part of the team. We've talked about how issues can go wrong. And the reality is in everything to do with broadcast. And we have to remember, while we are delivering services, they are still, at this moment in time, they are broadcast. It's practice. It's practice and know what actually you do when things go right, but also it's what you do when things go wrong. And invariably, if you ever watch live TV and you see when things go wrong, the best hosts are the ones who just sit there and slow down in what they're saying, think about the things and come up with reasons to find gaps, they fill the gaps without rushing through it. And we can, and there is ways and means to do it. So I will move on. Next question we've got from Chad here. Chad Lafarge has asked, if not training them yourself, what resources do you refer volunteers to learn properly to use the tools required to do the job?
Me.
Yeah, I was going to say should have left this to the last question on there for there. Michael.
I guess it's time. I guess, and this idea of staying calm and just getting on with it. Nobody is going to learn this process in one training session of an hour. Though it was very good, Leo, it didn't do half of what we needed, and you know that. And it's about having the time in the job. I feel like a football manager. Give me the time, and I'll get you there.
I have sat there and watched rabbis come in the week and practice what they're going to do, go through their services, practice their sermons, go through the services, practice the moves, and there. We all remember back to when, or some of us will remember back to when we did our bar mitzvahs, and you used to come in to practice and practice and practice and practice and practice and practice, and you did it, and you were literally there. You were for 10 minutes of your life. You'd over practiced 10 minutes of your life, and the reality is these things need practice. And yeah.
So there's an extension to that, which is the more you practice, you're looking at a sound desk. You know, when I was running my mobile disco in the 1970s, and I had little knobs and buttons to twiddle and push, and it was great. And now it's far more complicated than that, far more opportunities to get everything done. And I'm learning the sound desk. It's an amazing process to be going through in your 60s, to be relearning something I was doing in my teens and my 20s. But it's taken me a long time to get there. And I now have a look at it and I say, well, I wonder what this does. And I'm suddenly looking at effects and things like that, which I've never even thought about using before. So I think it's about having the time and giving the space to people to do it, and knowing every now and again, there's going to be a little hiccup. So stay calm and just give the people the time to learn their job.
Brett and then Marty.
I was just going to say that it depends on what your volunteers are doing, right? If it's software that they need to learn, there's tons of tools to be able to create exactly the things that you need them to do and show them how to do it and make sure that they go through the process of learning it as far as training goes. With the unexpected is time. It's really time and trying to create a database of knowledge of what to do in all of the situations you can think of, including like stop trying to fix it and pull out a phone, which is sometimes the only answer. But it's really going through all the paces of all the things you can imagine and making sure that you have backups to the people that you're training in case something happens on the human side.
So I would say this before I go to Marty. Coming from the world of sport and live sport production, the number of mistakes and the things that have gone wrong that people watching never ever know that they happen. Things break. Things, you go to this camera, dead. Right, okay, quickly switch to something else. Do something else. It happens. And most people will turn around to you and go, well, that was a wonderful service. And you're like going, oh, we had all these technical problems. And they go, we never saw a single one of them. We don't know what you're talking about. And it's like, yeah, I've got lists of services. And it's like, we should have done that. And we forgot to press the button here. We should have planned for this. We should have done this. We're 10 seconds late going into this. We're there. It just happens. And you can't stress about it in the end. At the end, you realize it's like, it's not that terrible, as long as you get the things. And anybody who has ever given a thank you speech will tell you they forget at least 3 people they were supposed to say thank you to at the end of it, and invariably one of them is their wife. And it's you're always in trouble. You're always in trouble for you thought that was brilliant, and then you realize you've completely mucked it up. But it's life. It's what we have to do. Marty.
So you put together a team of volunteers. Maybe it's a half a dozen team, maybe it's 20 or so. Who's going to be leading that team? Who's in charge? We talked about style guides, we talked about process, we might talk about standards, like what is the right way to do this? Because there may be 3 or 4. How are we going to do it? Leadership is really important. And when it comes to training, there's lots and lots and lots of training online for videos. There are lots of courses. There's documents, there's videos, there's even subscriptions, and then there's David. And but what are we going to learn as a team this week?
I
What
think that's
skill are we going to work on this week? And
I think
having
that's
everybody
an absolutely fabulous point here, and I would argue, and there are some rabbis on here, I would say that the best long term is that the rabbis themselves are not leading the technical side of everything, because otherwise everything is piled on the same shoulders. And they need to, one of the things that we're all going to find is everybody wants to take a break now. When we can, everybody wants to disappear and have a break. And if everything is stacked on the top of one set of shoulders, you're going to suddenly find we can't do this. We can't run a service because it's almost like nobody knows where the keys are to unlock it. So that's a really good point there. Okay, we've got our last 2 questions because we're right up on the time. We've sort of covered this anyway, but what are our best tech tools to give volunteers to help them to be successful? Now, I'm going to start this with automation. And by that, I would say the number one thing that we ensure is on every setup, and we see it missing on other quotes, is Stream Decks. And it literally is the difference between a workable solution and a whole box of bolts and bits that nobody can actually get their head around. And that's the Stream Deck. David.
When is I know that Stream Deck is amazing for, especially if you're using video production tools, and it has some functionality, important functionality for Zoom. But I'm waiting for Zoom OSC and Companion to become something that I can actually understand, so that I can really get the most out of Stream Deck when it comes to Zoom specifically.
Okay.
Is there? I mean, when is that going to happen? When are we going to be?
So we need to unpack something really quickly without going into too much detail. So most people out here who are watching this are saying, well, there's only Zoom. Actually, there are 2 other versions. There is at least 2 others. There's one called Zoom OSC, which is Zoom, which is controlled by a language called OSC. And then there is another version which is very, very in the beta called Zoom ISO. And Zoom ISO enables you to have individual windows of people. In both cases, what you're able to do is with Zoom OSC is press a button that says unmute, for example, unmute 3 people at random. So when you've got responsive singing, it's choosing 3 people at random so that you can just get that responsive back without everybody being unmuted. Or it's saying, I want to press a button on my Stream Deck. And for those who aren't familiar with what a Stream Deck is, it's this. This is a load of buttons that are controlling things. So I can mute and unmute myself. I can bring the windows forward. I can change my camera angles, all that on the Stream Deck. And on there, you can say that I've got 4 buttons. One is the rabbi, one is the cantor, one is somebody at home, etc. And when you've got Zoom OSC in play, you can then literally say, unmute this person, spotlight them, do something else, and then press another button which is which latches it off, which is mute them again and take them off spotlight and send my spotlight back to my rabbi. Cami and then Michael.
Yeah, just an important thing. The thing that makes Stream Deck and the things like it important is that they are completely programmable. So you can set it up for a particular event or a particular service. So it may be that in some events you have you want specific things that is the rabbi and the cantor, and in a different event you have a button that's for the guitarist and the pianist and the something else. So it makes it really nice because you can have it and they have labels, so you can actually have the label so you know what's what, and that's a big deal. It makes it much
Absolutely.
easier.
Absolutely. Michael.
Just to reinforce this, the first time after we went, when we went virtual and our musician wasn't around, and I'd recorded all, we'd filmed all his music that we needed for the service, and had all these video files on my computer. I had to screen share at the right time, and it was a nightmare. Actually, it was really difficult to do, and there were loads and loads of mistakes. When we did it the second time, we've got one panel on the Stream Deck. Each one of them is each piece as we need it. He doesn't even need to come to a service anymore, and we've got everything there. Just press a button and up it comes at the right time. Couldn't do it.
So we've talked about Stream Decks, and we can talk about them forever because they literally solve so many problems, and it's not just in production, but they solve so many problems everywhere else. Are there any other tech tools that anybody quickly would say that they would say that volunteers need? Brett.
Right, so I'm in the process of programming a lot of the commands that we would normally use a Stream Deck for into ProPresenter to be able to send those commands directly to the equipment, so that one person can both run the slides and also be controlling the cameras as need be. It's extremely in depth, but also will come in very, very handy, right? Right now we have things that are controlled by our Crestron unit, which we can program to do multiple things. And I have Blackmagic being controlled from an iPad using an app, but being able to consolidate all those things into one location that can be controlled by one thing is super beneficial for this stuff.
Okay. I know that, Michael, you're disappearing quickly. So if you disappear off the panel before we get to the end, I'd like to say thank you for being here.
Can I just ask Brett a question on that? Brett, from your Blackmagic, did you say, I missed when you, because I was just typing to Leo that I'm leaving, did you say you were able to put that into your Stream Deck?
So not into my Stream Deck. I'm using an app for iPad called Strata Pro. Strata allows you to control your Blackmagic ATEMs and things like that remotely with almost zero latency. So if I need to switch inputs between like what's on the screen and a camera, for instance, I can just I can just open the app and I can press a button, which is much easier than having to have a wire running across the Vima to control it using a Stream Deck or something like that.
Okay. We're going to go to our last question before we wrap up, which is slightly a controversial question, but it's a really good question. How do you handle volunteers not being as reliable as paid professionals? Brett, start with Brett, and then we'll go to Josie, and then Kami.
I pay them. No, I have to tell you that, especially among teenagers and young adults and things like that, giving them even a small paycheck for doing whatever they're doing made an incredible difference when it came to who shows up on time or early and who takes it seriously and doesn't.
Do you know, I sit there, and this actually, I'm going to roll it to Josie because she'll know. Your Hader teachers or young people that are there, are they paid for teaching at your Hader?
You asking me that or Brett?
Yeah, well, I'm asking you.
The first year after Kabbalat Torah, which is 2 years after completing a program after Bar Bat Mitzvah, they don't get paid that first year, but then they do the second year. So that would be 15, 17, when they're about 17, 18, then they get paid.
So effectively you pay them. Yeah. I mean, we're not talking about nobody's going to be rich over it, but you pay them. No. So the question is,
but they're not our volunteers.
No, I know, but that's where I come to next. Is at the moment we've run this as a volunteering environment. Should we be continuing and relying on all of our services through volunteers? What do you think, Josie? And then I'm going to go to Kami.
Well, the question: how do you handle volunteers not being as reliable as paid professionals? The only paid professionals we have are our rabbi and 2 musicians. The rest of us are all volunteers. All the entire tech people. We're only a medium-sized synagogue, I would describe us as. Would you say that, Leo? Medium-sized?
Yeah.
We don't have the money to pay to pay people to run our tech desk, or most of us.
I'd also argue, in a funny way, is that the people you want that are doing it, you probably couldn't afford to pay them anywhere near their standard salary in the other areas that they work.
The way Brett's talking, and even Richard in Southgate, about having his meetings on a Monday where everybody's there, and I'm thinking, I'm just thinking, don't these people have day jobs?
Let me go to Kami, and then I'll go to Richard, and then Marty. Kami.
So I've worked in lots of volunteer events, and I've had events where we've done a mixture of paid staff and volunteers. And the thing about it is there are other ways that you can compensate people. It doesn't have to necessarily be cash. So for some things that you can do is, there are other stuff for kids. There's lots of stuff you can do other than cash as well. But we've also found that just making sure that they're properly thanked, right? That somebody's talking to them and making sure that they're aware of the contribution they've made, that goes a huge distance for volunteers. It's the same thing for volunteers in anything. This is no different. If you have to deal with volunteers, it's often the case, as Leo said, that you couldn't afford the people that you would want. And you just need to make sure that they feel like they are, that they're being respected, and that you understand the value, that they know that you understand the value they bring, and that's a big deal.
Richard.
Can't you beat me to it, actually. As well as being one of the co-hosts over here, I have the privilege, if that's the right word, of also being the chair over at Charlotte Civic. And the biggest thing I do is I spend lots of time writing letters to people, thanking them for all sorts of things, and just remembering to say thank you to your volunteers is the most important thing you can do. Josie asked about how do we manage to go and do meetings and stuff. What is noticeable about everybody who's involved in all this sort of stuff is most of us, some people are retired, others of us, like myself, I work freelance. I've got my own company. I go and I fit doing my work round. I feels like at times the work is the hobby, and this is sort of like something I do. But actually, you just have to try and fit it all around each other, and it just means you work 80-hour weeks basically. But that's how you do it.
This has been a great session, and like all of these sessions, they could go on forever and ever and ever. I'd really like to thank our panel today. I'd like to thank that some of them have had to leave because of timing and other issues. I'd like to thank the panel that's still here, or the other ones. So Marty, Brett, Cami, Richard, Josie. It's been absolutely great. I love the comments, Josie. Someone put in a comment here that they love the fact that Josie is still very technical but retired. I didn't say it, so I can get away with actually reading it out without actually saying it. So there. I'd finally like to just turn to David, because he's got a big event coming up in a couple of weeks' time. I just would like you to talk about that quickly.
Sure. So on June 27th, I can't spotlight myself anymore because I gave you host. Sorry. On June 27th, we're having a Torah Tech Summit, which is also going to be sort of the wrap up of this season of what do we call ourselves? Dreaming Tech?
Dreaming Tech. That's I think.
All right. So Dreaming. So it'll also be the finale, if you will, or the season closer of that. We're gonna. It's really going to be a wonderful day. Rabbi David Ingber is going to kick us off. We're going to have sessions with leaders from ProPresenter, from let's see, where else? From Cinemaker. We're going to have many of the people who are here today teaching about audio, teaching about hybrid, bringing in honors, really everything you can imagine is going to be there. It's going to be a really wonderful day with perhaps most importantly, dedicated times for networking and tech working, so that you can connect with the people that the leaders, the thought leaders and the professionals that you need to talk to to get answers to your specific questions and challenges. So join us, toratecheye.com/summit.
Thank you. So I'm going to stop the live broadcast and thank everybody who's been watching out there on the other worlds and everything. For the people who are in the Zoom, give me a few seconds and then you can join us and have a conversation if you'd like to afterwards. So thank you again and we've got another section next week. We'll be covering some mini computers and how they're usable, the NUCs. We'll also be covering an example of another synagogue and how they've done their broadcasts and lots of other things as we lead up to the final sessions, as we said with David. So thank you all for joining us today.